The Creatives with AI podcast, the spiritual home of creatives curious about AI and its role in their future.
Morning, Will.
Very good morning, David. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's very exciting to be able to talk with other people about AI and to share my experiences.
Well, thank you for saving me. For those listeners out there, I got a little stuck last week because someone dropped out, and I put out a call to my network saying, can anybody come and save me and hop on the podcast? And thankfully you were one of the people that replied. And I had quite a few people reply as well. So now I have some bookings out for the next couple of weeks, which is amazing. But what jumped out for me about you that's really interesting and why I really wanted to have a conversation with you is that you tick several of the boxes of types of conversations that I like to have. And I'll get you to give your sort of background in a second. But, you know, you're a lawyer and you're working around sort of IP and that sort of stuff, and you're working with companies and you have some thoughts on particularly sort of legal considerations around the creative space. So that's totally interesting. But you've also worked in electronics and stuff like that. So you have a little bit of different industry background to bring in. You're also on the UK APPG, which is the All Parliamentary Party Group, around artificial intelligence. So that's quite interesting as well. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that where you can. And then you're also an illustrator. So maybe if you want to, I mean, that just ticks all the boxes for the podcast. So maybe if you want to, I'll let you give a little bit more detail about that, and then we'll just jump into a conversation if that's okay.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. It's a very kind introduction. I'm glad I'm ticking those boxes. So I'm a media and technology lawyer at a city law firm, Keystone Law, primarily based in London. My work involves protection of intellectual property and reputational rights for a range of clients. So those in the technology and creative sectors primarily. As you said, before becoming a solicitor, I worked for an electronics company in Hong Kong and in the US for a time. So I have an insight into how intellectual property in particular is applied in the real world across different territories. Not only the technical challenges of that, but also the cultural differences as well, which I try and bring that understanding to when I speak with clients who perhaps aren't in the UK. As you said, I've been a member of the UK Parliament's All Parliamentary Group on AI for about it's coming up to a year now. Actually, time flies, and that's been absolutely fascinating. I'm happy to talk more about my time on that. I'm also honoured to be asked to be an advisor to Projectis, which is a specialist technology company currently focused on blockchain technology, and as you said, in my spare time, I'm also an illustrator as well. So I like to see things from a 360-degree angle. So when my clients, who some of them are artists and other creatives, are talking about the value of protecting intellectual property, I can understand it from a very base level as well in terms of the protection that I expect for my work and the value of the creative industries and how I suppose how AI at the moment is going to impact on that and how the landscape's going to change. But yeah, and that's me.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, ticks loads of boxes, so that's amazing. I guess my first question really is about. I'd like to dig into the legal bit just a little bit. And sure. I've had some guests in the past. I've had an IP lawyer who specifically focused a lot on patents and that kind of thing and how, AI it might impact that part of the business. And I've also had a friend who works for the UK Embassy in Washington, D.C., and she looks at sort of, very high level IP and copyright type stuff. But it feels like you're more on the coal face of kind of what's happening with businesses in practice and creative businesses in particular. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on, where you think we are now and, what are the things that, because this is this podcast is focused on talking to creatives and people working in the creative industry. So, what's the current state of play? I mean, today is, I should probably give a date since this might get dated fairly. Things move quickly. So we're on the 11th of June in 2024, but where are we today?
Okay. So in terms, so do you mean in terms of where we are in terms of IP law and AI, or just specifically in terms of how my legal practice is using and adapting AI?
I think they're two different questions, aren't they? I'm definitely interested in how your firm is using it sort of internally and that sort of thing. But maybe let's start with kind of, I guess, what are you telling your clients? I mean, in a large sense, I mean, obviously I know, you get paid lots of money to advise customers, but, where do you think sort of the law sits at the minute, and what are the major things that people need to look out for or need to be doing at the minute?
No. Yes, and my legal rates are extremely reasonable. In terms
of course.
Just thought I had that one in there. Yes, it's a very good question, and there are some legal issues that people do need to consider, which have perhaps been overlooked with the excitement of AI. So AI is extremely exciting, and businesses and creative businesses and creative artists themselves are increasingly adopting AI. They're becoming increasingly reliant on it to assist with lots of different tasks, and it starts with ChatGPT and it goes from there to more sophisticated programs. But what I'm finding, speaking with clients and also looking in more detail at the AI systems that are being adopted and used, is there are some legal issues, I think, that people need to be aware of, some risks that can be managed and they can be mitigated. So it's not all going to be doom and gloom, and I don't want anybody to get depressed or necessarily to we're not going to abandon AI, but I just think the more that you understand about it, the more you know, the better prepared you are, because I don't want people to be caught out because the excitement of AI and increasing reliance on it could potentially lead to some issues. So when we're talking about AI and the risks, we can look at it from the start. So training AI. So to be as effective and accurate as AI is, it needs to be trained on as large a data set as possible. So depending on the type of AI technology, that can involve an organization loading into the system a large amount of data. That could be graphics, it could be designs, it could be other information and other data. Which is all well and good, and you want to feed it more because it gets more accurate, and the better the information going in, the better the result coming out of it. But some of the legal risks around that are so for example, personal data. So if either employee data or other contact data or other people's data is put into the system itself, and I'll come on to this in a little bit, that can constitute a misuse of personal data if you don't have the right consents around using that. From an IP point of view, in terms of training the AI, there could be an infringement of third-party copyright. So the learning process often involves storing, making copies of copyright works, which without permission is likely to infringe copyright. And there is a noted legal case ongoing at the moment, Getty Images and Stability AI, which is currently going through the High Court, which will hopefully determine that issue. And there are lots of complex legal arguments going around it, which is probably not the right place to get into that. But generally speaking, if you are storing and making copies of other people's works that are protected by copyright, and you don't have their permission, generally that will infringe copyright. And we also come on to another risk as well of trade secrets and confidentiality. So if you are inputting confidential information, or if you have other data that's a trade secret and that's being inputted into the AI to train it, the misuse of that is also a legal risk as well. So that's training the AI. We then come on to the middle bit, the processing of the data. And one of the key risks arising from processing concerns personal data. And I appreciate that when I start talking about personal data and data protection, a lot of people start to switch off, and it can be a very dry, very, very dry subject. But it's arguably one of the most important obligations that falls on any business, whether it's creative or not. And the danger with AI is that the black box nature of AI, where you're not quite 100% sure how it's processing that data, which algorithms are working, and how the data is being tokenized and how it's being churned around, how that's working. It makes it difficult for you as an organization to say that you fully understand how the data is being processed, because you have an obligation to say if it's being processed, if it's being sorted, organized, used, you need to understand that, because that is an obligation on you. And there are also other obligations of rectification, erasure of data, data portability, restrictions on processing as well that come into play, which, if you don't know how the AI system is doing it and processing it, that could potentially present an issue, particularly if you haven't obtained the necessary consents.
That's all part of the GDPR, right?
That's correct.
It's sort of been around for ages. I think we can still... I mean, I worked in ad tech back when sort of the GDPR came into effect. Yeah. And that, I'm sure you'll remember there were many, many hours and much ink was spilled over, the sort of talking about that. And I think we could still have arguments over GDPR and whether it's actually any use at all in the bit of tech. But my question is, or my thought, I guess, is I wonder if it isn't the black box nature of AI almost makes it better in my mind, because nobody has access to it. It's like if you know what it's doing, then somebody can figure it out, and they can figure out where to kind of get access to information or where to break the chain or whatever. Whereas with AI, when it just goes into the black box, it's like it's probably beyond human comprehension anyway. So even if we did get it to try and spit out some sort of a log of why it's doing what it's doing, nobody could understand it anyway, because it's gone so far beyond what we could even figure out. That almost feels safer to me than what we do at the minute, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And if you have the necessary consent from the data subject, from the person, the individual, to that, then that may not necessarily be an issue. But I think it's important to be able to explain, and there are various ways that you can do that, to your data subjects if that data is being put into an LLM, how that data is being processed. But there are some unresolved issues, and in terms of what that data actually looks like once it's being churned by the AI system itself. So there are some issues to consider in terms of how the AI system's using that data and what consents you can actually reasonably get from people. One of the, perhaps not necessarily on the storage or the storage of the data, but something that's relevant when you look at, say, the outputs from the AI system, and one of the issues that comes up is how much AI is relied upon for decision making in terms of, say, discrimination and diversity and equality, because AI systems are increasingly being used for recruitment decisions and also disciplinary purposes as well. And there are arguments that some AI systems tend to skew outcomes towards or ignoring certain protected characteristics, such as age, race, sex, and that can expose an organization to potential liability around that as well, if there isn't a human oversight around that as well. So the issue of how AI deals with individuals and their data is a hot button topic at the moment, certainly.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's interesting, that whole topic, and I've talked about this a lot, and it feels like this is sort of season 2, and it feels like season 2 discussion is going to be a lot around, how does it work, and what's this whole concept of trying to eliminate bias and things like that. And it's, for me, it's whose bias do you choose? Because every single human is biased and has biases. So whose bias is better than someone else's bias? And what the AI does is it reflects back the data that it's given. So it gives us an accurate picture, probably more accurate picture than we want, of what we're actually like. Now, the way to fix AI is to change the data that's going into it by doing things differently. So then the AI starts to give us different results. It's not, in my mind, it's not to create some fictional world that doesn't exist and have AI then try and tell you that that's how it is, because it's not how it is. No. And I think there's a danger in that, of there being some, it's like what happened to Google with their thing when they said, give us, images of the founding fathers, and it came out with this multiracial kind of thing. And it's like, that's where that breaks down. That's a perfect example. It's like, you can't force one thing to overwrite history or to give a totally different picture than what's there. And for me, that feels like that's going to be the topic of the year, is talking about how do we manage that? And, do we want a bunch of tech bros in Silicon Valley deciding, what those biases should be? Or do we want a Western liberal view of that? Or do we want a Far Eastern view? Or do we want a Southern Hemisphere view? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but that's where it feels like the risk is to me, because now what you're getting is battling kind of political views, and then people are putting those views into those models and then having them give results based on that. I kind of prefer that it to have no kind of filter forced on top of it, and for us to be able to see what the data is actually saying. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
That's a really interesting point. And as you say, how do the AI models are likely to differ depending on where you are in the world, and depending on local laws and territories and cultural ideals or cultural norms within those. Yes, ideally you want the AI to be as neutral as possible, but I suspect inevitably, it depends on the data that's fed. If the data is it will reflect. It can only reflect the data that it is fed to it to a certain extent. So I suspect that your AI is going to look very different in California and perhaps here than it is elsewhere in other jurisdictions. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are restrictions and other things that are put into AI systems used in different territories to comply with probably more stricter laws on that. I think it highlights to a certain extent, insofar as it can help, why it's important to have a human review or oversight in respect of the decisions that are being taken, insofar as that is possible. And this may date really quickly. And it's not just me being a lawyer going, well, clearly the individual is the one, because I understand the power of AI and I understand how it can and how currently in, the legal sector in particular, it's processing and analysing documents and processing all of that data far quicker and in far more detail than human beings could, or you would need a huge room full of paralegals or people to process that information. But what's still important is the interpretation of that by a human being, just as a safeguard, if nothing else. But also, there are things that AI can't do. There's a lot of soft skills that it can't do, and that's why so far a lot of jobs. A lot of jobs are vulnerable to AI, but perhaps not as fast as we think, because there's still a lot of soft skills, client relationship management, and things like that the AI can't do. So, in terms sorry,
I was just going to jump in and continue on that thread a little bit. It's interesting that you say that, and I've mentioned this in quite a few shows recently because I find it fascinating. But I don't know if you saw the article where they asked some questions that required empathy and ethical sort of answers to them. And they gave it to a bunch of humans and they gave it to a bunch of AI. And then they had people rate the answers of who they thought were the best answers. And AI won in both of those. So it gave more what real people considered more ethical answers and more empathetic answers than the actual humans did. And of course, because if you take something that has, 1 billion people's life experience put into it, and then you ask it a question about something about, how should you react to this situation, or, what's the ethical stand on this? It's taking all of that together, and it's taking all those experiences and then giving you an answer. Whereas on an individual basis, it's, I only have my personal experience from my life to base my empathy and my ethics and everything on, and you only have yours. And so we may have very different answers, but if you start to pull everybody together, then you start to get something that comes to the middle, right? You get the mean. And so I find that fascinating. And again, it gets back to some of these other things where I think AI would have an advantage in that point, because it takes away that individual viewpoint where somebody may be, of course, we're all on a bell curve, but somebody may be an outlier, and it actually eliminates that outlier status and kind of keeps everything in the middle. It'll make everything really boring because we need those people on the edges, right? Yeah. But sometimes I don't know, I'm trying to be glass half full about this, but going back to, sort of the HR thing and that sort of stuff, I totally get that it has issues, for what we want it to do. But in some instances, it may actually be better, because what it would do is it would take an extreme reaction from a human and go, well, actually, that's not the best reaction, because this would be the best course of action. I don't know. It just seems interesting. And that was, I don't know if you saw that, some of the articles about that stuff. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes again, but and I'll send it to you separately if you want to see it.
Yes, please. Yes. And I agree that AI is moving extremely quickly. And to an extent that it will produce those answers based on, as you say, for example, 1 billion people's experiences rather than just one person's experience. Yes, being glass half full, as you say about, and it's quite easy to say, well, of course, AI could replace pretty much everything, and the only thing I should go and do is do something involving highly skilled manual labor, because at the moment that's not something that AI has particularly been able to grasp on a very easy level anyway. But I still think currently at the moment, what I'm seeing with clients and with friends and other people in the say in the legal sector is that AI is being used in a very positive way to assist with tasks that are either more mundane or using as a backstop, as a check, or or even as a starting point for a lot of things. So, for example, AI is very good at it can be good at research, albeit we all saw the report of the US lawyer that relied too heavily on AI in his legal submissions, and it invented cases and invented quotes, and he was caught out by that. But Lord Justice Burrs, IP judge in the UK, used it relatively recently, AI recently, to summarise some points of law within a judgment that he was giving. And in his own words, he called it jolly useful. So,
love it.
Yeah, I know. only the judge could come out with that. And certainly from the legal perspective, Law Society said it presents incredible opportunities for us to use AI as a tool that's extremely useful, not necessarily as something that's just intended to replace anybody and everybody, because that's just, at the moment, that it's not good enough. At the moment, it will obviously get to that point, but at the moment, it's just it's not good enough. I think there's a desire from people as well. I think that people still want to know that, and it may be a flaw in our nature, but I get the impression that people still want to know that there was a human involved somewhere. If a decision's being made about them, some sort of oversight on that, or just to have ticked that off. So, for example, in the HR example, even if an AI is making a decision on that, I think that you still have the right in law anyway to have that overseen by a human being, and to know that even if that human is flawed, which we all are, and we all carry our own prejudice and our own bias but also our own experience as well. If that can be, if that's still implemented, I still think there's a desire for that. But as things move incredibly quickly, I will be seen as a dinosaur, and those younger than me will be saying, we trust the machine, we don't trust the human.
That's a great point. And how long? So here's the question. So how long before we get to that point? Because, you could see somebody in a large organization going, yeah, that lady Kathy in HR is a real bitch and she doesn't like me. I don't want her making a decision about me. I'd rather have the AI do it. And I guess a corollary question that goes with that is kind of, how long before, and maybe this will segue us into talking a little bit more about how you're using it internally, but how long before you kind of say, well, actually, 95% of paralegal work can be done by AI. I know that's not today. I have lawyers in my family, so I talk to them about this all the time. And I get that, paralegals do a lot of other stuff that, that are needed by humans at the minute. But how long do you think it'll be, I guess, before we get to the point that AI will be good enough that people will actually start to trust it maybe more than humans, and you'll actually say, well, I'd rather an AI do it, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No. I think that to a certain extent, people are already doing that anyway. I can quite easily see people asking for an opinion and then going away and putting it through, say, ChatGPT or Jasper AI or any of the other programs, and even Google now uses AI as part of its search algorithm to validate and verify. I can, with the speed that AI is running, I can see things moving to a point where as the AI gets more accurate, we're able to rely on it. From a legal perspective, I think you have to adapt and you have to run with the technology, and you have to understand it, because not only your clients are using it, but your competitors are as well. And if there's a competitor, and if there's an advantage to, say, analysis of information or documents, which is one of the things that AI is particularly good at, then you need to be on that curve as well. As to how quick that will happen, I'm not sure I could say entirely. There are things that slow things down. So just because the technology is there doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be implemented straight away. There is going to be a curve of trust in that. there's also, from any kind of regulated industry, there's going to have to be insurers and people who are happy to rely on that information, and there will have to be safeguards, I'm sure, in place. In terms of the service that it delivers to clients as well, it will have to be of an extremely high standard for that. What I would perhaps say is, just because you're relying on the technology, and that could replace junior people, that could replace paralegals, but I think there just has to be a lot more. Work. I don't know. It's difficult to put a time scale on it, because it would just become really outdated very quickly, I think.
And it'll be faster than we think, I suspect, or it'll be way longer. It'll be one of the two. But do you know what I mean? It'll either, somebody will figure it out, and it will, like, the dominoes will fall very quickly, or it will just get mired in the muck, and it will take years and years and years, and no one will ever do it. No. That's kind of how I feel it's going to go, one way or the other.
I agree. I think there's a certain incentive for there's a certain obvious commercial incentive for, say, AI companies to put out lots and lots of material and to hype up the press and journalists about how amazing the AI is and how accurate it is, and how it will take everybody's jobs within the next 4 to 6 months, because they want to promote their technology as being the best and absolutely incredible. Whereas, in fact, in reality, how much people rely on that technology, and how much that is trusted, and the quality of the data that goes into it as well, is all a little bit unknown. And I would wager that we're probably behind where we're saying we are, in terms of not only adopting and relying on it for more important and serious tasks, but also in terms of what its actual functionality and how much you can actually trust it day by day, I think.
Is there a legal GPT that you know of?
In terms of, there are companies, say Thomson Reuters and other organizations and companies which have legal software. There is legal software. There are lots of different companies offering legal AI software out there that can so, for example, the main areas are document review, so analyzing large volumes of documents, highlighting key potential information, contract analysis as well, so identifying potential risks and liabilities. Legal research is where AI was probably most notably being integrated. So the legal resource tools that we have in terms of searching case law legislation are now supplemented by AI. That's still at its more elemental levels in terms of the more it's used, the more it learns, the better it gets. So it just relies on time of people using it and analyzing the quality of the results and feeding that back into the machine so it can get more effective. And predictive analytics is a big area, and the Law Society has said it's a very promising area where it can predict the outcome of legal cases, which is meant to provide lawyers with better decision-making abilities. There has been a lot of discussion as to whether parties would, for example, say in a mediation or an arbitration, so that's effectively like a court process, but a private process between the parties, whether they would entrust making submissions to an AI bot, and the bot being the judge, effectively, to come out with the answer. I'm unsure as to how much that has been used, or the willingness to to go by that, to rely on that. But I can certainly see that's where it's going.
Yeah, I never thought about that one. That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
One of the other things as well, and I don't know, again, to get your opinion on this, is I've kind of always thought that eventually what we're going to see is what in the database world we would call a federated solution. And of course, they've come up with the special term around AI, which is RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, which essentially means is that if you ask, say, ChatGPT a question and it doesn't know you may ask it a legal question, and this is making this very simple. I'm simplifying this massively, but essentially, if you asked an AI tool like ChatGPT a legal question, it would then go, "I'm not really sure, but I'm going to go to this legal AI that specializes in only knowing legal information, and I'm going to ask it, and I'm going to get the answer from it, and I'll still give you the answer through my interface, but you won't know that I've gone to talk to this other AI, or a mathematics AI in the background, or it could be a chess AI, or it could be like whatever." And so when you talk to something, what you're talking to is the conversational piece that sits on top, and it has connections to all these different specialist tools that it can use. So when you ask it, it doesn't have to, it doesn't make up an answer. It goes to that AI and says, okay, this AI knows about this topic and blah, blah, blah. And it feels like that's the direction now that everything is going. And again, we've been doing that in the database world and the data analytics world for decades, where we call it federated. So you've got all these different databases that sit in different places that can't connect to each other. If you think about like in government or something, and it's like, well, and again, going back to data privacy and those sorts of things, like, well, this person on this team, maybe you work on the parking team in a local council. Well, you can't see the data that's in the, in the council tax database, because it's not the same database. They're two totally separate systems. And so you say, well, this person can't go over there because of data privacy and blah, blah, blah. So what you do is you put a layer of software on top of it that has access to all those different ones, and it pulls it together and gives it to you in one. So it can answer a question if you say, does this person live in the council? It can go and cross-reference, but it doesn't give the person direct access, if you know what I mean. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about, because you might end up in a situation where there's even specialist AIs within the legal realm that do different tasks and have been trained to do different things, but you could have one sort of node and one AI that you talk to and say, ask it a question about this. Say, is there anything funny in this contract that I need to be aware of? And somebody puts a random line about fish in there just to see if you've read it. And I'll go, well, there's this random comment about fish. I don't know where that came from. That's an old trick that we used to do in contracts when I worked for a company, just to see if people read it.
That's a good one. I've heard of people a lot of people put deliberate mistakes in either contracts or in certain content as well, so you can tell if it's been copied, or as you say, you can tell if somebody's actually properly read it or not.
Exactly. And that was the old Van Halen story from years ago about the brown M&Ms. I don't know if you know that story, but one of the rider clauses in all of their contracts is that they had to have a bowl of M&Ms in their dressing room, and it had to have no brown M&Ms in it.
Okay.
And they used it as a point to, not being fun. I mean, they thought it was a funny thing, but they always knew if someone had actually read the contract or not. So when they showed up, if they had just a bowl of M&Ms, but, or didn't have any M&Ms at all, then they knew that no one had actually read the contract. There you go. Showing my age there a bit, but there you go.
No. I understood the reference. It's fine.
But I think it's, I mean, for someone like me who runs a small business, who, doesn't have a lot of extra money. So, a lot of times if I need a simple document like an NDA or something like that, I'll go on one of the legal websites and I'll just buy one for £30 or whatever it is. And it's going to be, it's not super custom to my business, but it covers me for 99% of what I need covered. But what's interesting now is if people send me contracts, I literally can use an AI tool and say, hey, is there anything in here that I should be aware of that's unusual for this type of agreement? And sometimes it comes back and, it'll give you a list of bullet points, but it'll say, basically, no, this looks like a standard agreement. You go, okay, great. But sometimes there is stuff in it where it's like, well, it doesn't, in this type of agreement, it doesn't usually say this type of clause. And you're like, oh, interesting. So for regular people, it's also, I think that could be really useful for trying to understand what documents were being sent.
Yes, I can see that. So both of your points I can see in terms of so you were saying about the federated solution and about incorporating lots of different AIs talking with each other, I think is very important. And I think that is, it's very similar. It's performing a similar service to, say, your traditional, say you would have your lawyer that might be a commercial lawyer, and you'd go to them with a few different queries, and then they would go into the firm and there may be an employment type query, there may be specialist IP query, there may be a corporate share type query or something like that, and they would be your one point of contact, and they would go and find the information and they would present that to you. And I can see that it is better to have a specific AI solution which is extremely good at one thing, rather than having something general which is okay but will hallucinate a lot, or it will just create things out of nowhere, or it's just not able to cover it. And that has been a trend in law as well, is that you're finding that clients are because you have so much choice now, is that they're able to go online and a client, and I've had clients like this in the past, they will have different lawyers, maybe at different firms even, for different aspects of various things that they do, because they want to pick and choose the best particular lawyer at that. Now, I must say that hasn't happened at my current firm, Keystone, because everybody is very, very senior and experienced and very specialist at what they do. So we've been able to connect them with people within the same firm. But from a consumer point of view, a client's point of view, it's very good that you're able to go out and you can do that to a certain extent. And if you have what used to be called a consigliere, or one point of contact as a lawyer, they would then normally go out and fish for that information. So I can see that happening. One of the things that you also have to be careful of as well is confidentiality issues, and how much data and what data you're putting into not to bring it round again to this, but data confidentiality is one of the things that is something that needs to be considered with AI, particularly in legal cases as well, when you've got can have some extremely sensitive commercial and other information. That's important. So you can't necessarily just go into ChatGPT and start putting in all of this data, because whilst you might say, it's all being churned around and nobody knows what's happening, you don't know where that data is going to end up and how it's going to happen. Because to go back to the Getty images and Stability AI, Getty found that Stability had used its images because Stability started to generate AI images which had the Getty logo on, because it had analyzed so much of Getty.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
That it was looking for the fish in the contract. Effectively, it's I see. You've clearly learned that from somewhere. And if it had our watermark on, then
which is hilarious, by the way.
It's yes. All I'm going to say in that case is there's some really interesting legal arguments being advanced from Stability AI's point of view in terms of that. In terms of their defense, it's a very, very difficult one, because a lot of defenses rely on the use you're making of the work being for non-commercial use, but obviously with AI,
but it is,
it's going to be commercial use.
I think I'm conscious of time, and I do want to talk about the APPG at some point, but we have a couple of quick things to cover before then. Now I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, I know I was going to ask. So thinking about the legal stuff and working with clients, I know you also mentioned that you guys do some sort of an AI audit or something like that. What's that about?
Yeah. So, as I was saying, there are lots of risks that, to be honest with you, don't blame clients for not being aware of them, because that's why you have lawyers, to be quite geeky and to think of these issues. So the AI audit effectively goes in and it maps the terrain as far as possible in understanding what technology is being used within either by an individual creator, or by an organization, so advertising agency or marketing agency or other organizations. And it asks all those questions, and it maps exactly what's being used and where, because most employees don't necessarily they might not realize how much they're relying on AI, but it's always interesting to find out what's happening. So you go in there and you map and say, well, what's being used by whom? What data is going into it? What is being produced by the AI, and how is that being, as I say, from an oversight point of view, but how is that being checked, and how is that being deployed as well? So we go in and just talk to the client about that. We can go in and do all of the really boring stuff. So the mapping the controller processor relationship for data protection things. And also think about it from an employment aspect as well, in terms of whether the use of the AI is compliant with current employment law and regulations, because employment law changes almost on a daily basis. Which, for my employment colleagues, I'm not an employment lawyer, but for my employment colleagues, makes it extremely exciting. But as any HR manager or anybody in a position of responsibility for other people has found out, it can be a bit of a minefield if you're not 100% compliant, or questions are asked and you're not quite sure how that's going to work.
Exciting wasn't the word that came to mind, so that's okay. We can run with it.
Dramatic and fear-inducing. If you don't necessarily have somebody you can rely on to advise you.
Exactly.
In that respect. So the AI audit, it basically just goes in and understands what you're doing, and it helps you to navigate that field, because to be honest with you, the existing law is having to keep up with AI, and at the heart of the AI is a software system. And whilst the algorithms may be mysterious and unknown to a certain extent, there are lots of things that we can put in place. Understanding, for example, what terms and conditions you're using the AI systems under, because some of them are really nice and generous, and ChatGPT kind of says, it's all for you, don't worry about it, it's all fine. And we push all the liability back onto you in terms of ownership and liability. And some are more restrictive. There are other systems that will claim ownership over part of what's being produced or generated. And you just certainly, to go back to the data, from a data point of view, but also from an intellectual property point of view as well, you need to be able to kind of map out what's being produced by whom, and is that covered by your existing policies internally, or if you're an individual, if you're a sole trader, if you are somebody that goes in and is commissioned or contracted to do things, are you protected in terms of protecting your own IP? Because it is, it's the most valuable thing that pretty much any business has, whether it's content, whether it's creative or non-creative content. The data and information they have is the most valuable thing. So it's just important to be aware of it, and just to have protections in place and exclusions in place where there's need to be exclusions in place as well. Because whilst it is early stages and there are a limited number of cases that we're aware of going through the courts, that will change. And traditionally, we're about 6 to 9 months, maybe 12 months behind the US in terms of court cases, litigation, liability. And the US is having more and more cases going through about the role that AI plays within the creative industries and also within businesses as well. And we will catch up very quickly. And I just want to make sure that clients are best advised so they can manage and mitigate that risk. You can't eliminate risk because it's a part of doing business.
Yeah, of course.
You can manage and mitigate it.
So how long does the audit take normally?
It depends. It depends on the size of the business. It can be a relatively short process. It initially starts with a conversation. So we'll have a discussion about how the business operates and what essentially is in place at the moment. And if it's only limited use, it could be a relatively short process. And if it gets to be more complex, then we can work with their IT teams, their marketing teams, and other people into that process. So it's like how long is a piece of string? It can be relatively short, but if it's more complex organization, it could be something more involved. But certainly from, say, the director's point of view, they want to be certain that they have ticked that box to make sure they're still compliant.
Okay. And another thought that came up while we were talking about that, and again, before we get onto the APPG, which is, I don't know 100%, so anybody out there, don't quote me on this, but I was talking to someone the other day who's very knowledgeable about this sort of thing, and he was mentioning the fact that if you use the API, so if you connect to ChatGPT, for example, using the API and not typing stuff in and copy and pasting and all that actually it doesn't store any of the information that it uses through the API. So if you have a question about a document that has IP in it, for example, and you're using that through an API connection, it actually doesn't store and use any of that data for training. So it only uses the training data to do the analysis, which is an interesting little wrinkle to that. And I think that for a lot of businesses, that could be hugely important. So if you're using a third-party tool, or even if you get an IT team to build you an internal tool that is your internal interface to it, then that could be a way to protect your information. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm going to be at the AI Summit for the next 2 days, and I'm going to try and wrestle someone from OpenAI to the ground and make them answer the question for sure, just so I don't give anybody any wrong advice. So I'm not a lawyer, and this doesn't constitute any legal advice, but that's my understanding as well. So that could be, if it's true, that could be a good way for businesses to think about having that extra layer of protection, that at least they know that their data is not being recorded and used. It's just being analyzed in the moment.
I can certainly see if you can create that closed environment, much like with a private blockchain or a closed and private limited blockchain, for example. Yeah. If you have that closed environment, almost like a sandbox that you are that you have full control over, and it's not going anywhere outside of your organization, and the AI is just using its analytical tools on that and producing a result that essentially goes nowhere. I can see the use of that, and if that was able to ensure the confidentiality and that the data went nowhere, and the client was happy for their data to be analysed in that respect, I can see that being a very positive way. A very, very positive way forward. And I would encourage you to wrestle a person from OpenAI to the ground. They need to be held very accountable for a lot of things that are being released.
So watch the news tomorrow.
Definitely.
We'll see. Some American guys wrestled someone from OpenAI to the ground at the AI Summit. That'll be hilarious if nothing else. Okay, so I do want to talk about the APPG, and maybe for those people who listen who aren't in the UK and who haven't worked with public sector like I have for the last decade, maybe if you could give a 1 or 2 minute overview of what that is, and then I'm really, really curious, like, what is it you actually do, and what do you talk about when you sort of meet up and you get together, and how does it actually work? So if you could just share a little bit on that, I think that'd be really interesting.
Sure. I've been involved, as I say, with the APPG AI for about a year now, and it has been, for me, it's been a fascinating journey. So the All Parliamentary group itself, what it does is it examines the impact of AI across various sectors. And so what it intends to do is, as it says, it fosters a dialogue between policymakers, industry experts, and academics. So it collects a lot of information in. And it meets about once a month, or now because Parliament will be broken up, I think the next meeting is actually in September. But it aims to inform legislation, to promote ethical AI use, and to look at the implications on society and the benefits of AI on the general public. So I was introduced to it through Projectus, a technology company, as I say, I'm associated with. And what the group does is it meets about once a month, and it collects lots of information, collects lots of evidence. So it invites leading figures within. So each meeting will have a very different focus. So, for example, education, you had leading figures from the world of education. You had one of the leading people from, say, Duolingo was there, and other people adapting technology to education. You have the creative industries. One of the most interesting meetings I was at was on generative AI and the impact of that, because that obviously is foremost in the minds of particularly my creative clients or my artistic clients. So they had the head of AI for Sony Music was there. They had a representative from DAX, the Design Artists Copyright Society, that represents artists and ensures that they get fair pay, royalties distributed, protects their copyright. If people don't know. And they had other people from other technology companies and organizations there. And you're hearing different perspectives from different sides of the technology line. So those that are creating the technology, adapting it and using it, and are very excited to do that. But also the other side as well is the people, the industries, organizations that are directly impacted by that. So for example, in that generative AI meeting, there was reference to a report that came out earlier this year from DAX, which assessed the impact of AI on the creative industry. And one of the themes that came out of that meeting was the need for transparency. So what original copyright protected work has been used to train AI, and has there been or is there going to be fair compensation for that use? And DAX in their report said that I think it was something like 84% of respondents, so artists, creatives, would sign up for a licensing mechanism that they would be paid for their work whenever their work was used by AI. So I think people are more open to the reality that AI will consume and take your data and your information. All they want is the transparency to know when it's being used, to obviously originally, ideally, consent to that or not. To which would be the normal situation if I came and said, can I use your graphics, or can I use your music for this? And you go, that's fine, you can pay for a license for that, and you'd have various restrictions around that to protect the integrity of your work, etc. And if that hasn't happened, arguably it's an infringement of copyright. And ideally what the artists want is just fair compensation, because you can see that AI models are valued extremely highly, and they will be making commercial use of that training, of that input data. So
I wonder, just to jump in,
Sure.
It makes me think of, I had a fascinating conversation with a guy about a year ago, and he was talking about medical records in the NHS. And, for years and years and years, like even if you wanted to see a copy of your medical records, you couldn't get it because the doctors were like, well, no, they're our records, they're not your records. And particularly over COVID, there was a huge step change in the view by the population, and I'm going to say normal people, but people outside the NHS, that it's like, hang on a minute, no, that's my data. It's about me, so it's my data. It's not your data. And actually, we need to give you permission to see my medical records, not the other way around. And he said they now have an app where you can actually, you can use the NHS app and some of the other stuff to see your medical records, and you can get access to it. But he said what caused that was the change of the view that people started to realize, and this is through social media and online advertising and everything, that there's been this switch where it's like, hang on a minute, that's information about me. That's my personal information. So I own that. And if you want to use it, you have to pay for it, or you have to ask me. And it's kind of we're getting towards that same thing as what it, kind of what it sounds like. It's like, okay, it's fine. You can license my illustrations or my writings or my music or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But it's like, I don't even know how it would work, but I could see almost like you think Spotify, which is maybe not the greatest example, but it's the same kind of thing. And I think we might get to that point with personal information as well. So it's, as an individual, you go, okay, well, you've used some of my personal information to, say, target ads to me or whatever. So if you want to target an ad to me, you have to pay me part of what the cost of that ad is, for example.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. So you get these presentations. Sorry, that was just a little aside. So you get these presentations from people and all that sort of stuff. And then so does the group, do you then like write that up and make a recommendation to government, or is it I mean, I know it's all parliamentary, so the whole, and it's cross-party. So you have representatives from all the different political parties are part of this group as well, and that's part of the reason for it.
Yeah.
So do you write papers? Do you make recommendations? Or is it literally just a group that, because of who's on the group, people want to come and talk to you? And so it's a good way for politicians and influence, I'm going to say influencers, but people within the industries to get that information that maybe they couldn't normally get.
I think it's a good it's a good way of, I think, highlighting important issues. So in terms of the politicians that attended, the value that they get is, yes, they get direct exposure to people who are leaders in the industry and people that they want to talk to, because inevitably what evidence is given, so what's been said by various people, will be fed back into parliamentary discussion. If there's, say, a private member's bill or something like that, then that information is all fed back. So it's an opportunity to ask questions of those people that are there. It's all recorded and it's all publicly available. What's been said and recorded. I think the primary value is to the politicians to understand exactly where we are in terms of technology and the various points of view of interested parties. Because, as I say, particularly on the generative AI, there are there are people falling on different sides of the line in terms of AI, its usefulness, its application, and what should happen. I mean, the one common theme that came out of it was transparency in terms of what's been used, what data has been used. But it's a good opportunity just to raise questions and raise issues as well, because each of the people that's invited to speak has 5 or 10 minutes to give their own talk, their own representations, and to feel that they are heard as well, outside of the usual social media and other statements that they might make. It's just, I mean, from my point of view, it's just extremely useful to be able to speak to those people. Either you can raise a question or you speak to them afterwards, and you feel part of that dialogue. And yes, you're hearing things perhaps a bit before they are released generally in terms of press releases or social media as well. So it's a little bit of a bit of an advantage to understand what's happening within that space.
Sounds great. Sign me up.
You can. I can send you a link to it.
This is my own personal APPG that I try and pull together and share it with everybody. So I know the feeling. Thank you very much. We're just now a couple of minutes over an hour, and I'm conscious that we're getting on in time. Where I assume people just go to your law firm's website, which is keystonelaw.com, and they can get information on if they want to do an AI audit or anything like that. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. So you can, go to Keystone website, and if you find my profile and contact me, and I can give you all of the information that you need about that, and I can chat to you about it and just give you a bit more information as well.
Perfect. There we go, everybody. If you want your AI audit, give Will a call and he can help you out. Will, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a fascinating conversation. And thanks again.
My pleasure, David. Thank you very much again for having me. It's been really great to talk about these issues.
Cheers. We'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Creatives with AI is a proud member of the AI Podcast Network. To stay up to date with current episodes and show information, subscribe to their newsletter at podcastnetwork.ai. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform, so you'll always get the episodes as soon as they're available. Thanks again for listening, and stay curious.